Hello, glad you can join us. Ethics. How do we uphold them ourselves and how do we audit them in our organizations? We'll have those discussions plus In Focus coming up. Stay tuned.
The Institute of Internal Auditors presents All Things Internal Audit.
In 4 days, the IIA's 2023 International Conference will begin in Amsterdam, Netherlands. And Dr. Ian Peters, director of the Institute of Business Ethics, will be there to share his presentation, Why Ethical Culture is So Important, and tips for auditing it. He joins us now for a chat with the IIA's Senior Manager of Content Development, Robert Perez.
Dr. Peters, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm looking forward to our chat about your presentation coming up at IC in a few days. I'm sure folks are eager to hear what you have to say on the subject of basically ethics within an organization. And that's obviously what you and your organization does. In your presentation, you say that one of the fundamentals of an ethical organization is having a purpose beyond simply making money. Tell us a little bit more about that and how that influences other characteristics of an ethical organization.
So this is about setting the tone in an organization, the direction of the organization, and bringing everybody in the organization with you. And you know, if it's a commercial organization, of course, a key element is to provide a return on investment. But actually, most organizations, arguably all organizations, have a purpose that goes beyond that. They're there to achieve something, whether it's delivering food to the world, whether it's providing people with the goods and services that they require. It's usually much more specific than that, relating to their particular business. But it's also, purpose defines why we do what we do, not just what we do, but why we do it. And if people understand why we do it, if all the people in the organization sort of get that, then they're going to be more motivated and more committed. And what goes with purpose is values. So what we like organizations to be doing is not just saying, well, this is our purpose, but these are the values that underpin the delivery of that purpose. And there's plenty of evidence to suggest that works, and that's really important. So I'm sure many of the conference delegates will be familiar with the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is published once a year. And one of the findings in that barometer is that around 60% of customers prefer to buy from an organization whose values they share. And actually, it's a similar percentage, around 60% of employees prefer to work for an organization whose values they share. And really interestingly, when it comes to financial performance of the company, around 80% of investors say that they prefer to invest in an organization whose values they share. Now, whether that's accurate or not is open to debate, but certainly the size of the proportion is significant. And so that's why we would say purpose and values really need to come first.
And you sort of touching on my next question is that what are some of the keys to building an ethical culture? And obviously, purpose and value are going to be among them.
Really, what matters most is leadership. And if leadership gets this, then we're absolutely moving in the right direction. We're on a roll. So that's about leadership leading on purpose and values, yes, but also communicating effectively the way we want our organization to behave, the culture that we need to develop to promote those values. So leadership is the starting point. Purpose and values have to be in place. And then what we say in the Institute of Business Ethics is you then need a plan. So that plan starts with an ethical risk assessment. So you need to understand your ethical risks, where they are, what they are, and then moves on to a plan of action, if you like, which will include devising a code of ethics, communicating that code effectively, training your people in how to make the right ethical decisions, um, and um, and then beyond that, developing an open culture, one which promotes and encourages dialogue, and in particular speak up or whistleblowing. And that's really important. It shouldn't be seen as a last resort. It should be seen as a natural conversation that takes place. If anybody sees something that they feel isn't quite right, then we want them to feel able to speak up, and we don't want them to be afraid of retaliation. Um, so all of that's really important. And then finally, we need to measure the performance. Are we delivering what we've said we will deliver? And that's where we move on to how do we measure.
Let me interrupt you there just for a second. You talk about the idea of building the ethical culture and having the pieces in place, the code of ethics, training, which is important, that speak up culture that you mentioned as well. So why is it, unfortunately, that we see so many companies getting into trouble on ethics, on culture?
The real, I guess, pity is that a lot of organizations don't really take this seriously until something goes wrong. And so, clearly when there is a crisis, when they do trip up, then that's when they start looking at maybe, well, what should we have done, or what should we do now? But it's a bit late. So it's really important that organizations put their plan in place and don't wait for a problem. I've heard many times when I've spoken to people, I've been told, oh, well, we're okay, thank you, because we don't have a problem in this area. Well, you may not have a problem now, but you may have a problem in the future. And that's where the risk analysis, of course, comes in, which internal auditors understand only too well. That fundamental of understanding the risk, working out where the greatest risk is, and then putting in place the appropriate mitigation. Now, ethical management, ethical culture management is a mitigation. It's a really fundamental one. It's a central one. And if you don't do that, what sort of things are going to go wrong? Well, your reputation is going to suffer. You may suffer in terms of the support from investors. You may find it more difficult to recruit good people for your organization. You may lose the commitment of the people in the organization. So there's lots of real downsides to not taking this seriously and putting a plan in place.
And obviously, like as you said, the list is long, but it's obviously important for companies to start thinking along those lines. And similarly, it's important for internal audit to be able to recognize those measures as well. So again, from an internal audit perspective, some tips on auditing culture and ethics.
So, well, one thing I should have said a moment ago, actually, and it's typical, isn't it? You forget the most important point. One of the indicators that the ethics function should be aware of is the internal audit, findings of internal audit, because that can give a real insight, of course, into the behaviors of the organization. That's why in recent years, of course, internal audit there's been such a focus on culture and how do you audit it. Now, how do we audit the what we would call the ethical culture of the organization? Well, first and foremost, we need to look at what the organization's doing and whether it's got the right arrangements in place. So it begins, just as I said, in terms of planning for developing an ethical culture. It begins with leadership. What is the board doing? Does the board give ethical culture airtime? Does it look for reports on the measurement of ethical culture? Is it tracking it? How seriously does it take it? Does it have a subcommittee of the board? Does it have a board member that has specific responsibility for focusing on ethical culture. And then what arrangements are in place? Is there a risk assessment of ethical risks? Is that on the risk register? Is it maintained and kept up to date? Is it tracked? Is it assessed properly, just as the main areas of risk are? What's the role actually of risk management in relation to ethical culture? And then, is there a plan? Is that plan adequately resourced? Is it tracked? Is there a code of ethics? Is it a quality code of ethics? Has it been externally assessed? How often is it reviewed and updated? We would recommend at least every 3 years. And then other matters I've spoken about already. What speak-up arrangements are there? Is there trust in those arrangements by employees, or do they fear retaliation? We do an international survey every 3 years, and one of the things that showed the last time we did it, around half so it's global, and around half the people responding to the survey, from all countries, said that they had spoken up about something in the last 12 months, which was quite a surprising number. But of those that spoke up, about 45% said that they had experienced retaliation. So there's a really important area of focus is, are people being retaliated against? Are they being victimized as a result of speak up? Because if they are, word will get around. Everybody will realize that, we're not going to do that because, we'll be in fear of losing our job. Or we don't think anything's going to get done about it. So fear and futility are the two main reasons why people don't speak up. Fear of retaliation and the concern of it's futile, it's a waste of time. So those are some of the things that, auditors can audit. And then, of course, going full circle, is the ethical culture being measured and assessed? Let's have a look at how that's being done. Do we think that's rigorous and robust? Has it been pushed as far as it can go? Is it effective? And then is it being reported on? Is it being fed back? And is that then being actioned? Just like an internal audit report. There's no point in producing a report and then everybody goes off and ignores it. The most important bit is, are the recommendations put into effect? And it's the same when it comes to measuring ethical culture. We need to understand where the weaknesses are and we need to address them.
Well, obviously, you've given us lots to digest here. The importance and criticality of ethics in an organization takes on so many different manifestations as we go through. So clearly, the folks who are lucky enough to attend your session at IC are going to be able to hear a lot, learn a lot from you. So I very much appreciate you taking time to give us this sort of sneak preview of your presentation, and I'm sure it'll go quite well. Thank you again.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm really looking forward to engaging with the internal audit profession.
For more information and to register for the 2023 International Conference, visit the IIA.org/IC. And now for a bit of challenging fun we call In Focus. CAEs and other internal audit leaders often manage more than just the internal audit function. What percentages of leaders reported accountability for the following areas of responsibility outside of internal audit? Fraud investigation, Sarbanes-Oxley programs, ethics or whistleblower programs, and ERM programs. We'll be back with the answer very soon. Ethical resilience is often listed as one of the top attributes of high-performing internal auditors and audit leaders in organizations around the world. Internal auditors must know and guard against blind spots, a temporary inability to see the ethical aspect of a behavior or decision that is being made. Richard F. Chambers, Senior Internal Audit Advisor at Audit Board, shares more on this topic with Kathleen Sius, VP of Standards and Guidance at the IIA.
Richard, so in your presentation, you referenced to the IIA Code of Ethics. How do you think the code holds up in the current dynamic and evolving risk landscape?
Well, Kat, I think the you absolutely hit it right. The risk landscape is changing very rapidly. There's so many traps that internal auditors and everyone really can fall into when it comes to ethics. I think the new proposed ethics and professionalism standards are going to address that. I think they are a significant step forward, and I think they'll help mitigate some of that risk. But I think at the end of the day, the only one who can really mitigate the risk of an internal auditor doing something unethical is the internal auditor. It shouldn't ever be dependent on standards. It should be what's in here.
Yeah, and talking about those blind spots, there are different scenarios. Like, for example, when you have worked in a certain business area and then you have to audit it, how would you deal with that? Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, you're right. In the speech or in the presentation, I talk about 10 different scenarios that I've seen where internal auditors unintentionally, in some cases, committed an ethical transgression. And the one you mentioned is a perfect example, where we might have worked in an area before. We suddenly find ourselves now in internal audit and we're asked to go back there and do some audit work. Let's say we find something that isn't well controlled or some risk that's not effectively mitigated. And then we know deep down that maybe that was the case when we were there. Then the question is, can we audit that, or should we recuse ourselves? I mean, we have an objectivity impairment, and it's just an example. I've seen internal auditors who just sort of said, well, I'm not going to talk about it because it would reflect on me when I was there. Well, that's the wrong answer too.
Yeah, sure. So what would your advice then be? What would your guidance be when you have detected some blind spot as an internal auditor? What would you advise them to do then?
Well, I think the thing we have to do is to always be transparent when we have an objectivity impairment. If we know that we can't be objective, we should say that. We should call it out to our boss, to the CAE. And if the decision is made that we still go ahead and are part of the audit team, then there should be some disclosure of that. Because, objectivity is our ability to carry out our work free of bias. And if there is any chance that we're biased or that we could be perceived as biased, then we have to be willing to acknowledge that and make sure that the communications that we have around it are transparent.
Thank you very much for sharing these insights with us, Richard. Thank you very much appreciated.
My name is Renato Triciusi. I live in Brazil, and I have been working in the internal audit field for almost 30 years. And I started my career in internal audit after that. So, and I started a career, and after years by years, I needed to lose weight. So I thought at the time that if I start to training for triathlon, I can lose weight. So I started to training in 2012, 2013, and after almost 2 years training, in 2014, I made the Ironman triathlon here in Brazil. So I spent 14 hours and 24 minutes to complete the Ironman triathlon the first time. And the triathlon Ironman, you can see in the internet and on TV. It's amazing because it's very similar with our profession. It's the same in the internal audit field, because we set some goals in the audit project. So in the triathlon, we needed to set the goals. I started to learn in swimming in just the child phase, but biking and run, I needed to learn how to biking. It's the same in the internal audit project. Sometimes you needed to learn new competence or technical skills or some IT new tools to develop in the project, and you need to have a persistence. So in the triathlon, we can do a better every day. In my professional life as an internal auditor, that we needed to know to be better and better every day.
Now here's the answer to our In Focus challenge. CAEs and other internal audit leaders often manage more than just the internal audit function. What percentages of leaders reported accountability for the following areas of responsibility outside of internal audit? Fraud investigation, 48%. Sarbanes-Oxley or SOX programs, 33%. Ethics or whistleblower programs, 30%. ERM programs, 29%. Compliance/regulatory model, 15%. Audit rule, insurance, 4%. Other, 14%. None of the above, 20%. IIA executive membership delivers all member benefits, plus exemplifies the preeminent membership for a high-level, seasoned internal audit executive. Members access customized tools, tailored content, and peer-to-peer networking focused on leadership, team development, performance, and problem solving. For more info, visit the IIA.org/executive. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to like, subscribe, leave comments, or a rating. If you'd like to enjoy an extended version of the discussions featured today, visit the IIA.org, where IIA members get access to a longer version of this episode with bonus information and insights on ethics in internal audit. Plus yourself with the IIA. Earn your data analytics and literacy certificate. For more info, visit the IIA.org/plus yourself. Thanks for joining us for All Things Internal Audit from the IIA. We'll connect again soon.